Greetings and welcome back to another discussion on my channel. I'm joined tonight by Juan, who is going to be informing us about Colombia, and possibly Puerto Rico too, as well as the differences and contrasts with the United States. He seems apparently to be familiar with all three of these places, as he's partly Colombian, partly Puerto Rican, and has an American passport. So thank you for joining me. I guess the first question to ask, mentioning those three places, I know Puerto Rico technically is a commonwealth rather than a country, but we'll refer to it as a country for now. If you're to compare all three countries in terms of similarities and differences, particularly let's start with Colombia versus the United States, what tends to stick out first in your mind?
Okay, well, first thing that sticks out is the big butts, right? Every girl has a big butt. And it could be 90 degrees outside. They all have tight jeans. They all walk around in 6 to 7 inch heels. Colombia, it's a place that men are men and women are women. And so all the men are like hyper masculine, all the women are super feminine. And I would also say that like the biggest culture shock, just like going there, is how alert everyone is. You know, no one's messing around, no one's staring down at the ground on the me phones, as you call it, because you can't, because you will get mugged if you do, almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, you often hear this about South America in general, that men are quote-unquote men and women are quote-unquote women. But I would imagine this is, you mentioned this privately prior, but obviously in a situation like that, or in a place like Colombia, there's no robust welfare state, and so the luxuries available to both men and women, they might be present, obviously, for the wealthier, the people who have enough money, but nobody's going to bail you out. So I would imagine it's of prime importance for a woman to attract a male protector, provider, and so, yeah, that would explain, I think, at least this quote-unquote femininity of theirs. If Colombia, through some miracle, ever achieved wealth and economic equality, which is kind of a misnomer, but we'll call it that, of the type you find in Canada or the United States, I think you would find a very rapid transformation in the direction of, basically the Anglophone world. I don't know if you disagree with that, but that's how I would see it.
Ooh, Buffy, look, you have no idea. Like, I'll be walking, right, and I'll see a perfect 10, right? Like, she's a supermodel. She is like 6 feet tall. She got the 90, 60, 90, right? So she's got that hourglass figure, right? And she's walking, and she's got this troll. This like dwarf. He's like ugly. He's got acne marks and everything, but you could tell he makes a lot of money, and you can see that he drives like a brand new BMW. So it's pretty clear to see how, like, okay, yeah, she's definitely not with him because he's attractive.
Well, yeah, I think women have to, in trying to procure a mate, obviously you have to deal with two different things, or two different issues. One, is he able to provide resources and maintain a decent level of wealth and status. And it's not to say that women aren't interested in things like genetic health and appearance. They obviously are.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act for them, whereas men, as a rule, tend to only be interested in the physicality. Sure, there might be things like personality, but men are oftentimes willing to overlook that. So, obviously a good-looking guy who has money is a better pick than a bad-looking guy who has money. But if you have to choose between a good-looking guy with very little money versus an incredibly rich guy who's not good-looking or average, I imagine, as a female, depending on your age, of course, that you would be choosing the latter.
Yeah. Not like there's different types of exceptions, but yeah, mostly that is in fact the rule. Also, in Colombia, what you see is that you see one block that like it's got nice restaurants and everyone looks happy and they're all dressed in like super nice clothes and they'll be driving the latest Mercedes Benz 2017. And then on the next block, you'll see a lot of homeless. I mean, there's like homeless everywhere, but like there's especially there's this one homeless guy that like even like I want to say like my oldest brother like he used to live in Colombia 19 years ago. He saw that homeless guy. Imagine this old tan wrinkled guy. He's got a hunchback. He walks around in shorts and he carries two concrete cinder blocks. And if you're wondering why he's got the concrete cinder blocks in each hand, it's because if someone tries to mess with him, he smashes them.
Hmm. Well, I mean, this seems to be a recurrent theme in South America. There are obviously enormous wealth disparities, based, from what my understanding, I'm not an expert, but I have some knowledge, in various South American countries. Brazil is probably the one that seems most common, based along
Oh yeah.
socioeconomic lines as well as racial lines, because that's part of it as well. I would imagine that and so you do get these sort of, to a Westerner or an American, these strange scenarios where um, you have enormous wealth concentrated in a small area, and then not too far away, you get staggering amounts of poverty. The
Mhm.
closest thing I can think of to that, at least growing up, and I think it's changed as New York City's become more and more gentrified. For
In
those
New
of
York.
in New York, correct, is that historically, up until recently, because as I said, it's probably become gentrified in my absence. As you move from Harlem into the nicer areas of the Upper East and Upper West Side of Manhattan, it wasn't staggering poverty, but certainly it was vastly poorer than the areas of Manhattan, and then so you have this sort of fusion, and then it disappears altogether. But I don't think you ever really got, in my experience, at least in New York, these huge and really glaring and eye-opening disparities that are very public for people to view and see. But this seems to be the way the show is run in South America as a general rule. I've met in the course of my travels uh, Bolivians, all of them wealthy, by the way, Bolivians,
Yeah.
Peruvians, and they all seem to, Mexicans as well. That's obviously Mesoamerican, but still. They all have something in common in that the ones I met, that they're completely far removed from the quote unquote people. And so they live a life of luxury. They're all wealthier, or at least came from families far wealthier than mine, by the way.
Mhm.
And they really had apart from the fact that most of them, they obviously spoke Spanish of varying sorts, there was just nothing they had in common with the lower. They were all probably had largely of European stock or descent, because they're all fairly light skinned.
Mhm.
And I don't think I've ever met a dark skinned or a mulatto wealthy Latin American abroad in my life, in fact,
Mhm.
which is interesting.
Oh, not mulatto. Yeah, no, like, and I would say that's the same thing for my family because I do have Spanish descent in my family. My like great grandfather, he was a Spanish ambassador in Colombia, so like he was of rich, noble European stock. If I go down the family lineage, probably probably one of my like Spanish ancestors probably owned slaves. So like it's pretty funny that like I got both sides. I got the slavey and I got the slaver. But yeah, like let's see, my mom and all of her like 5, 6 brothers. Yeah, they all grew up rich. So I mean, like that stopped, but like growing up, yeah, they had it all. They were super rich. My grandpa's got he's got a statue of him in the museum in Bogota, but I've never went to see it because I haven't been to Bogota yet. But I would love to go and see my grandfather's statue.
So,
But
how do you feel? I mean, in your experience, how do you feel these wealth disparities affect daily life for everyone in Colombia? Is it something that people just acknowledge and accept as a sort of rule of life, or is it something that people feel needs to be challenged and corrected for? Because obviously, these are not divisions that exist in most Western countries, but they're very prominent in most of Latin America. So the stratification is this something that is an issue that people actively talk about, or is it just like the rain, and in that case you just take an umbrella? Is it just something to be accepted, or do people challenge it?
I would say that the younger generation, they will definitely challenge it, but the older generation says, look, I gotta make my money, I gotta do what I gotta do. I'm not gonna sit around and march and hoo-ha, because if I do, I'm gonna die. Okay, because I didn't make that money. Which is why you can be standing in line and someone is always trying to sell you something, right? Gum, cigarettes, a chair, sunglasses, you name it. People are constantly hustling. That's the main difference, is that people don't sit around and say, oh, well, I don't got a job and I got some kids, so I'm just going to let the government support me. No, they say, okay, well, I got to go out and I got to figure something out. And that's the biggest thing, is that I'll see some of my family members here and they'll wait around for the government to give them money. Over there, everyone's proactive. They're working.
Mm. And I mean, when you say the younger generation is more willing to challenge it, is this because they've been receiving some of the waves of information from the internet and all the social justice stuff, or is just do you think it's based on that, or is it based on something else?
Yeah, I would say that sitting around on the local street corners, just like talking and whatnot, there's a lot of like pseudo like Marxist or like very like left wing young people. Now, obviously not all, but I definitely met a couple that they're definitely like super lefties slash on the border of like low key Marxism. And
And
I'm
they're
like,
wealthy
look, um,
or have enough money.
yeah, like they're definitely not like in the poorhouse. But
Right.
like, it's funny because the girl that I talked to, like, she's like a punk, but like she's got a pretty good job. So like, she's a punk girl, but like she's got a good job. So I'm like, huh, okay. And she's all like super like a lefty, and we need to do this and we need to do that. But I'm like, well, she's making good money, so yeah, she's clearly gonna be saying that. Now, that's one thing I like about Colombia, is that well, one, there's more punks, and I love punks, but also is that you can really see the like group differences. So like, I have some family members that they're all trendy. I have other family members that are like rockers. You have the old salseros, which like are people who love dancing to salsa. Um, you have some people that love 80s music. I love 80s music too, but you really get to see this whole like panoramic view of people. And it's funny too, because also the clubs in Colombia, it's mostly people in like their 30s and 40s. It's not like young people. All of the young clubs, those are like the really bad clubs. Those are like dive bar clubs.
Mm. Now, okay, so that's quite a lot going on there, I suppose. The main thing is that there there are huge social divisions in Colombia that you can't really, they don't really exist in the United States, at least to the same
No,
degree.
no, no.
How much? I mean, based on observation, do these social divisions tend to fracture along racial lines? Would you say?
Uh, no, I would just say that like, hey, you're poor and you're not poor, because there are there are like rich blacks.
Hmm.
There are. There's not much, but there are. And there's poor light skinned Spanish stock
Well, yeah,
Colombians.
I'm obviously, we're talking about general rules here. So, for example, in
Yeah.
Brazil, as a rule, you see the highest concentrations of wealth in the people of mostly European descent. And then it goes to the mulattoes, and then the ones mostly of African descent seem to be worse off. As a rule, obviously there are exceptions. There always are.
Okay. Well. Yes. Then in that case, yes. Hmm. Yeah. So blacks are the poorest. Then like depending on like skin color, it like raises. It seems that all of my family members that are super light skinned, they all have nice jobs and comfortable apartments and nice cars.
Hmm.
Whereas I see all of the blacks and they're usually not doing too well. Not doing too well.
You mean on the streets of Colombian
Yeah.
cities, right?
Yeah.
So, but is there kind of, I mean, once again, in Brazil, from my understanding, what I've been told, that there's a very sort of almost hyper racial awareness that everyone's Brazilian, but there are differences. Is that the same case in Colombia, that people are very, I suppose, open about acknowledging these, at the very least, the skin differences and all these other things?
Well, yeah. For instance, there's several Colombian sayings like "negro ni la zapato," right? So not even my shoes are black. Or like, for instance, blanco corriendo, atleta negro corriendo, criminal, right? So, if it's a white guy running, he's an athlete. If he's a black guy running, then he's a criminal.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so they would like to tell you no, but in actuality, yeah, everyone's like, no, no, thank you.
And and I imagine it's the same, these sort of same divisions you see throughout South America. You have
Yeah.
people of Amerindian
Oh yeah, they don't
admixture.
like.
Hmm.
Yeah, they don't like Indians either.
Right, right, yeah. So, I mean, this seems to be, once again, not unique to Colombia. I've seen this pattern in places like Peru and Bolivia and
Oh yeah, definitely.
Uruguay.
It's a South American thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems quite different from, well, maybe not as different from the United States as we're inclined to think, but certainly in the way that people talk about it and think about the issue, it's definitely
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, well, like, obviously in the U.S. everyone's very nice about it, right? But how often are they gonna let like a Tyrone from the South Side go inside of their gourmet coffee shop? Probably not.
Well, the question is, would Tyrone from the South Side want to enter the gourmet coffee shop to begin with?
If there's a sexy white girl in there, yes.
I see. Well, that is a possibility, I imagine. Yeah, I mean, this just seems to be the eternal problem in, or if you want to call it a problem, or the eternal setup in South America as a rule. But if we kind of cross some ocean to Puerto Rico, which is a commonwealth of the United States,
Hmm.
uh, it is different there, isn't it? I mean, I grew
Oh
up with
yeah.
lots of Puerto Ricans. I've never visited the place, but yeah.
Yeah, like everything for a Puerto Rican is a song and a dance. King, 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 Puerto Rico, king, king, king. Yeah, it's funny because it looked like Puerto Rico. It's weird because even though like it's supposed to be a commonwealth, if you would ask the average Puerto Rican, like, do you feel Puerto Rican or do you feel like American? They'll tell you Puerto Rican, and you know a Puerto Rican because they always have the Puerto Rican flag somewhere. It's shaved on the side of their head. It's on a shirt. It's on a Bulls tee. It's on something. So you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
And you
well,
know, like, don't forget that we have Despacito by Daddy Yankee and Justin Bieber, and that just killed it. That killed it. And everyone said, oh, these are Puerto Ricans. Okay. I like this.
so they feel no attachment to the United States.
Uh, n- not unless then they need funding. If they need funding or like they need to move, then yeah. Then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, I'm an American. But like until then, most Puerto Ricans can't even speak Spanish. Speak English. They can't speak it. Now you would think as a Commonwealth, you know, they will learn it, but for some reason they don't. That is like, nah.
Well, there are plenty of citizens of Nueva York that can't speak English either, so it's not really that shocking. Many stories and things I can remember growing up there where you'd walk through entire neighborhoods and you wouldn't hear a single word of English. You'd only hear Spanish pretty much. So it's it doesn't shock me at all that a Spanish-speaking Commonwealth of the United States wouldn't really use English at all. So.
Yeah, like I will say though, I love I like the Puerto Rican Spanish because it's hilarious. It cracks me up every single time. I mean, like it's so different. I guess like the parallel would be like if you try to like show someone who speaks proper English and then show them a black guy in like the South Side like speaking what is basically Ebonics. And like instead of saying going to, they say funna, and you're like, oh, okay, where do you get the F from, Juan? Like it's so different, and I mean Colombian Spanish is like different too, but like it's more like dancey. It's more of a dance speaking it, whereas like Puerto Rican Spanish, I don't know, it's just different. You have to
understand. I've studied, even though I'm not very well versed in Spanish, I've read and studied a bit about the dialectology, and it seems that insular Spanish, which is to say the Spanish spoken in places like the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, tends to be what we'd say in linguistics morphologically a little bit less complex in the sense that they drop endings. So it's like tienes, from my understanding, in some varieties of, say, Dominican Spanish, you would just drop the S as an example. And what happened as a consequence of that in insular Spanish is that you get far greater usage of personal pronouns, which, of course, in Spanish are usually attached to the endings, and you can skip out on them if you want. But if the morphological endings of certain words, particularly verb conjugations, become so weak, then you have to basically use the pronouns. Actually, the term for this in linguistics is called pro-dropping, which is to say you drop the pronoun. You don't need to say. You don't have to say yo tengo dinero unless you really want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
But if
tengo dinero, papá.
Sí. But if you're speaking a dialect or a sociolect or a variety where the endings become so weak that you can't hear the differences between tiene, tienes, etc., then you have to basically express the pronouns. And that's very common, I know, in Dominican Spanish. I've heard that's relatively common in Puerto Rican Spanish, too. Of course.
By the way, Puerto Ricans hate Dominicans. Just to let you know.
Well, everyone,
they also hate Mexicans, too. But Mexicans hate us, too.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting thing that's happened in the colonized areas where Spanish is spoken, and there are some divergent developments there as a rule. This, basically just based on reading, because my Spanish is relatively poor. So. Yeah,
no, that's fine. I mean, you speak like 50 languages anyway, so you can't get everyone right.
Well, as I said, I never. It's weird. I grew up largely surrounded by Hispanic people. I mean, there are other people too, but most of them were Hispanic, and it never made much sense to me to even try to acquire Spanish because most of them were bilingual. And what's the point of doing this when everyone else speaks Spanish from the cradle onwards, and I have to just put effort? I mean, it might help. There's always some demand in the United States for Spanish. I also never really, I mean, at least originally, my approach to languages tended to be based on what I at least perceived as sort of the intellectual qualities of the language. And when I think about, I mean, there are some writers and philosophers and thinkers in the Spanish tradition, but they just really pale in comparison to, say, German or French and so on. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, like, the Spanish countries, we are much better at, like, dancing and drinking and having fun. Okay? You don't go to Puerto Rico you don't go to Puerto Rico to get any sort of, like, meaningful business done. You go there to have fun, meet a sexy Puerto Rican chick, and then you go back home and do actual business.
I imagine, like I said, I've never been to Puerto Rico, but I mean, like I said, there are some exceptions that come to mind in general in the Spanish-speaking landscape, but they just Spanish never held that interest in me the same way, say, that French or German did, as far as the European intellectual traditions are concerned. And in addition to the fact that, I was a gringo, as the Mexicans refer to me, amongst many, mostly Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. So I just thought, why should I learn Spanish when they all speak it already, and English? So
yeah. Oh, actually, speaking of which, off topic. My niece, she studied French she studied French constantly for 5 years, learned all of the ins and outs, right? And then she goes to Paris for an entire month. And she tells me no one spoke French in Paris. And she went to look and she says, where are all the tall white French guys and white French women? All I see is short black North Africans and Muslims from either Turkey or Tunisia. And I'm like, well, there you go. There's France.
When was this?
This was like, I want to say like 6 months ago.
Okay, so fairly recent. Yeah. I mean, I've lived in France before. This was ages ago, and yes, increasingly, I've actually not visited at least any major city in France since having left there as a resident or just somebody living there. And it's definitely undergone some transformations, you could say, and it's demographically it's changed. And I mean, we're kind of veering off topic here, but I think of all the countries in Europe that are potentially the most unstable and rife for some type of conflict, if you want to say that, I would say France is probably the one that's closest to what I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if we were to assess it along the lines of civil conflict, then France absolutely would be the closest, simply because of all the divisions. The numbers just don't lie. They're just far more, in France, far more unsavory sorts than compared to other places. Although places like the Netherlands and what have you are definitely catching up. Yeah, and that I'd say in France France is basically done, and it's probably been done for at least a decade.
Yeah, and that makes me sad because I used to watch Rick Steves' Europe in his like 90s board shorts, and like I see France and I'd say, wow, that's beautiful. One day I want to go, and now I see France and I'm like, I don't think so.
I have no personal desire to ever go back to France. I'd considered years ago moving back there, but there's no real point. It's not really France anymore. And
yeah.
And besides, I mean, even prior to this, the early 2000s when I was living in France, there are certain things about France I don't really like. There's dog shit everywhere on the streets. So that's annoying. That's
hilarious.
And there are other things that kind of get on my nerves. I mean, I guess as a rule, and maybe that's because I'm an Anglophile, I just tend to get along better with the Germanic-speaking peoples than I do the Romance-speaking peoples. But
how dare you, racist?
Maybe, but I mean, I speak French reasonably fluently, but I don't really. There's not much of France left, and what I do like about France tends to be sort of literary and historical relics. It's definitely not the contemporary culture. Or, I mean, it's great to. There are tons of castles and chateaux and what have you, but there's not much attractive about that.
Actually, speaking of castles, while there is no like castles, you could say, South America, I will say that the closest things that you do get to castles are those churches. Those churches are beautiful. They are beautiful, and they are in
Well, that's a
wonderful
topic in
shape.
and of itself. How does I mean, the vast majority of South American countries are deeply Catholic,
Well, you wouldn't know it.
I don't allegedly, and believing too, is in quite
Yeah.
actually religious. They actually believe some of the stuff, the claptrap. Now, you said you wouldn't see it, you wouldn't know it. Is in the same sense that in the southern parts of the United States, you have a lot of professed religious belief, and
Yeah.
yet you see some of the highest rates of infidelity, out of wedlock
Mhm.
child reproduction, and all these things, and so it tends to be more a facade than any, at least in as much as they actually believe this stuff. It tends to be a bit of a facade. Would you say it's a similar phenomenon in Catholic Latin America or South America, in particular Colombia?
I would say that is completely the case. The girls, they dressed all scantily clad, which personally I don't mind, but for Catholic reasons, that's not right. The average girl will probably get pregnant around 14, 15.
Hmm.
Some get pregnant at 13. But overall, yeah, they say that they're Catholics, but they don't read the Bible. They don't understand any of the literature. If you talk to them about it, they would probably tell you to stop talking about it because it's boring and they're not interested, and they would rather go out and drink some aguardiente and have fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, so it's very common in Colombia for young teenagers to have children.
Oh, extremely common.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, I have multiple family members on both sides, my Puerto Rican and my Colombian side that are 14, 15. I had one on my Colombian side. I won't say who, but they had one at 13.
Oh, that's impressive. That's very
It
impressive.
is. It is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm trying to think. Western Europe, you don't get that very much. Although there is the so-called chav culture in Great Britain, where you do tend to observe a lot of teenage pregnancies. Remember
Well, yeah,
some.
but that's different because they have the state and they know that they're gonna get the
Uh,
welfare checks. It's not the same. You know that if you get pregnant, you know that's on you. If you don't do something, you're done. So that's
So
the
what
craziest
happens
part.
to a 13-year-old girl who gives birth, is a mother at 13 in Colombia? I mean, is it the case that I'm assuming the father is then probably a teenager too, somewhat older? Do they tend to sort of quote unquote step up to the plate and then assume fatherly responsibilities, or how does that work?
I don't know much about the father, but I know that the mother, she's got a nursing degree already, and she's working, and I mean, it's incredible how much she's stepped up to the plate. I mean, it's a 180. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a total change of wow, she went from, well, just a total different person, absolutely responsible as a mother. And I think that's because she understands that there is no welfare in that, and that if she doesn't do something, her baby will die. So, so I really do think that that has a severe effect because I've known people here that they never get their act together. I mean, I know some people that they haven't worked in 50 years and they're still telling the government that, oh yeah, you need to support us.
So you
So I
know
really
people
do think,
where you live in the United States that have been receiving welfare checks for close to 5 decades.
oh yeah, yeah, 6 decades, yeah, yeah, that's normal.
Do you live in a very Hispanic or Latino area?
No, we got out because um like none of my I guess it's pretty funny, but none of my Puerto Rican side, none of them finished high school. So
Right.
overall, overall, you could say that we're the most educated. My father, he finished high school, he finished university, which is very odd, and I am right now. I'm studying too, but like I'm even debating doing the university for all the good that it's
What
worth
degree are
now.
you studying for right now?
Right now, I am studying business management and entrepreneurship.
It seems, I suppose that could have some application. It's a bit seems bland, but yeah, I mean, definitely it would be more useful than a quote unquote English degree.
Well, yeah, like right now, I'm working on like a couple of like patents, so like I'm running that through, and I got some stuff in the pipeline. So, I mean, I would say that like I'm leagues, not to toot my own horn, but I would say that I'm leagues above the average Puerto Rican or like Colombian that you would find because the problem is also, I think that, and I don't know if this is just a cultural thing or like if this is because of the close proximity to like the urban black environment, but they don't value education. Like education is a naughty word. Being smart. Oh no, that's boring. Oh.
Well, Juan, I think this is an interesting observation, and in fact, this attitude of not only not valuing education, but outright disregarding it and really sneering at it. I've
Yeah.
observed because I have a lot of interaction with people your age and even younger vis-a-vis my internet activities, primarily through the gaming world, but not just through there. And then I hear stories from friends of mine who are attending university, and this has penetrated outside of black urban culture and perhaps outside of Latino culture in the United States into, I guess you could call it sort of broadly white American culture, although I think that's poorly defined, where people
Mhm.
really they actively express almost a hostility towards towards knowledge. I've encountered this
Yeah.
many times online, and I
No,
hear
man,
these.
that's boring, man. Let's get it.
No. It's more like this. It's the dude, bro. Hey, bro, what's up, man? Like, did you get fucking wasted at that
Yeah,
party, man? Like, fuck,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
What about an assignment? Yeah, fuck, I'm too wasted. Like, I'm gonna send it in late, but like the professor, yeah, man, he said I get an extension. Like, it's all good, bro. Like, yeah, man. Something like that. And so there's I think I mentioned this in a talk recently. I was commenting on someone's name in an online game, and then I said, "What the fuck is that?" This guy was clearly white. I think I think that this has become the trend overall, and to Americans 50 years ago, as a rule, whatever their background, ethnicity, racial profile, of
Mhm.
course there was some variation there too, but still, as a rule, were more educated, um, comparatively speaking, than
Well,
they are now, despite the fact that the internet is, without question, the biggest repository of human knowledge that has ever existed. But
well, you
hey,
hear this. Well, yeah. You hear this from Thomas Sowell all the time. He says,
yes,
"Hey, look,
yes.
like back in the '40s, we were actually reading and working hard, and now no one wants to read." And it's true because I knew guys on like the high school football team that they could read at a sixth grade level. And honestly, it'd be hilarious because they would brag, "Oh yeah, man, I'm smashing all these girls, I'm doing this, I'm doing that." But the second that you would make fun of them and say, "Hey, hurry up, read faster," that would be that would just be a stab to the heart. They would get so embarrassed, and all of that talk of the girls and drugs and money and this and that, none of that would matter because the worst thing that you could do to someone is make them look stupid in
And
public.
these are white people, by the way, right?
No black,
Oh,
but
they're
well,
black.
yeah,
Okay.
some white. Actually, yeah, yeah, like there was one white guy. He was from the south side of Chicago. I think like Irish, but like
Well, I mean, I
yeah.
think this is a. I mean, although it certainly has historically been more prominent in the black community, and my impression, having known a lot of Hispanic people, that it's fairly prominent there too. The sort of disregard for knowledge and education that this is just spread across the country, and so I think at this current stage, the United States, more so than ever, is just a, a place, a country, a field ripe with buffoons and people
Oh, definitely.
who have no not they don't even want to inform themselves. I mean, I'm working on a video on this slowly but surely, but the reason why, for example, Jordan Peterson is so popular and is essentially revered as a type of prophet is because people know nothing. The youth of today know virtually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who's attending university in the United States who's in his mid-20s, and I mean, compared to his peers, he's on a completely different level. It's still not, I mean, it depends on how you would grade it, but it's still vastly
It's
more
on a
impressive
curve.
than it's on a curve compared to his peers who know absolutely nothing about anything. And the only thing that the conversations they do bring up is some party they attended and how they missed the
Yeah.
assignment X or um, it's
How
it's
this one girl let the guy eat her ass out and shit. So like, okay, buddy, but how about that idiot, huh? They're
well,
like,
it's
what?
just that there's no the, in fact, it's gone so far. He related a story to me most recently in his modern German history class of how I believe it was some book about some topic. I don't remember exact. The topic is actually irrelevant, and some guy had. I wouldn't say the audacity because maybe it was legitimately boring, but he simply certainly had the gall to just say, like, yeah, professor, like, man, it's like really boring. Like, no offense, man, but like, it's fucking boring. And to a professor, in
uh,
my day, and I used to address my professors as sir.
yeah,
No sense of
I still
respect.
do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's largely gone. Uh, I think this is just a trend that we definitely have been experiencing the dumbification of the United States.
Oh, most definitely.
And someone who grew up there, at least in a certain part of the United States, and can compare, say, the 80s and the 90s to the current year or decade. It's almost shocking, but there you have it. I think
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, I could just tell endless stories about the hilarious encounters I have. I mean, for example, I have to. I mean, I have to restrain when I'm speaking to a young American online. I have to restrain myself and be cognizant of the words I choose because I oftentimes I'll use what I regard as basic vocabulary and they won't even understand what I'm talking about.
Mm.
So yeah, I definitely think this, even though it had historically been more prominent in the black community, uh, but I think it's clear that education. I think education historically had some linkage to some type of status. So even if you had studied something as lame as is currently the case, English literature,
Yeah.
say 4 or 5 decades ago, you might have at the very least been a literate person, a person who was well read, who could write well. You might have gotten
Mm-hmm.
a position as a journalist or a copy editor or something useful where you could make enough money and then maybe, certainly as a man, attract a mate or something along those lines. But increasingly, education has no real payoff, and so I'd imagine for the youth it's very difficult, especially if you're not the type of guy with knowledge for the sake of knowledge that historically I had been. I just sort of studied subjects that interested me
Yeah.
because they interested me. I mean, for whatever
Yeah.
reason. But if you're not that type of person, then there's very little allure in education per se, because it doesn't really deliver on any specific goods in terms of the market or market status. That's particularly true for men. And yeah, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
tough sell. My
Well, I mean,
recent,
like,
go on.
oh yeah. Oh well, like, I would say like a couple things, right? So, like, for instance, I remember you said a while back you saw about the program, what's it called, Grammarly,
Oh
and how
yes.
like that, like, it's just okay. So like I watched this I mean, in fact, I was gonna watch one of your videos, and then I see this 2 minute commercial about like Grammarly. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is a student that goes in, she can't form proper sentences, she doesn't know the there, and there, right? And then she ends up at the end of the commercial. She gets a perfect A and a smiley face. Meanwhile, if you actually sit her down and say, "Okay, do it again, except no Grammarly," she'll fail.
Right, right. And there's something that sometimes is loosely referred to as the Google effect. I think as a whole, the entire world has grown increasingly reliant on external means of remembering things, supporting knowledge, etc. And there's actually some historical precedent for this in some sense. If you go far enough back historically, there was a time when across the globe all literature was oral literature, and so in many traditions you have a bardic tradition where it's passed along lines. Someone is chosen for the role of bard or the retainer of this knowledge, and the person learns it by heart and understands the mechanics and what have you.
You see that a lot in the Hebrew Bible. Well, like they'll
obviously,
the
Bible originally was based on an oral tradition. The Iliad, absolutely. The Odyssey, all these ancient, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all of these are based on oral traditions that go back far, far longer than their written counterparts. And certainly throughout Native American culture, you have a fairly rich oral literary tradition. Of course, very little writing apart from certain exceptions, in the case of the Aztecs, the Mayans.
Yeah, unfortunately.
The Incas.
Which, by the way, I'm shocked, right? Because I'm right now I'm working on writing out a book, right? So I'm doing research, and because the book is set in between the slave era of the U.S. And so it's like 1830 up until the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. But anyways, I'm shocked how much I'm learning just researching and reading through the history of these different Native American tribes. I mean, it really is fascinating. It's a shame that they didn't write more stuff down, because I would love to read more.
I mean, the vast majority of Native Americans wrote nothing down. As far as I know, apart from Aztec civilization, Incan civilization, and Mayan civilization, there was no writing system of any sort. I might be missing out on something, but of any prominence. The same is true of the vast majority of hunter-gatherer societies. Sub-Saharan Africa, Polynesia, the Australian Aborigines, etc., etc. There's no need, really. The Aboriginal tradition is oral as well. But so when you get that transition from oral tradition to a written tradition, although writing was very much the province of the elected, the elected few, it can sort of a memory bleed, because you rely on. I mean, the whole purpose of a dictionary is relying on things, even a handheld dictionary of the old sort, that aren't present in your mind and sort of referential. But now, I think this is in some sense a natural extension of the way things have always been, that people trying to look for the easiest way to go about things. This is true, and this is I would say it's almost what you could call a natural law in terms of human behavior and human language. Just before I mentioned pro-dropping, where you don't explicitly say in Spanish. It's not just Spanish; it's true of other languages too. But because it's easier, it's just easier to drop complicated endings and just spell things out. It's the same as a rule across the board with human beings. I think this is. It's regrettable in some sense, or perhaps maybe not regrettable. It's unfortunate, but I don't see any way around it. The current generation will be the Grammarly generation. I remember back in the day when I used to fight for the existence of the English subjunctive. Well, that battle that war.
Oh yeah, you lost that one.
I lost it probably at least 2 decades ago, and maybe if I'm generous, 10 or 15 years ago. Now I'm fighting the war for a distinction between plural and singular, and there is and there are, and this is disappearing.
Oh boy!
As So
Yeah.
the well, what can you do? This is the course of human affairs, and I mean, but my concern is that people are legitimately dumber, they're less informed, and that can never be a good thing going into the future. Whatever the specifics of the future might be, especially
Yeah.
when you, comparatively speaking, in previous decades, 4 or 5 decades ago, had a relatively well-educated population across the board, with some variation according to ethnicity, but whatever. And that is gone by and large now, with a few exceptions. I would suspect even at the highest echelons of education, the Harvards and the Yales, well, we already know some of these SJWs at Yale, but that the upperclassmen of a Harvard in the current year couldn't hold a candle to the upperclassmen of a Harvard of, say, the mid or late 50s. Just in terms of, comparatively speaking, I'm adjusting for time and the differences in history, just in terms of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge and cognitive capacity. But this is this is the road that people have decided to go down. I think most of
Yeah.
my audience knows I'm not a huge fan of education for everyone, because I don't think it's for everyone. Certainly
No. No, it's not. No, it's not.
the dude bro who's talking about the party and some girl he smashed, he would be better served learning how to fix toilets. And
That's a good job.
it is a good, well, it's certainly lucrative. Yeah, you can make a decent
Oh,
amount
hell
of money.
yeah. That makes look like look like a good plumber can make, in some cases, more than an actual lawyer does.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Especially,
it's a dirty job, so not a lot of people want to do it. So there's demand.
yeah.
But but at the same time, you have to ask why this profile of person, specifically young male, is at university at all. And I think it's pretty obvious. I've gone into this numerous times, educational industrial complex. But yeah, I see this as a general trend, and I think there is a kind of, people have talked about this as a potential danger of the United States slipping into the equivalent of maybe a Brazil or Colombia, these countries that are very stratified,
Mm-hmm.
where there's absolutely no common ground. I mean, one thing that, say, Charles Murray, who's written a lot about this and talking about this, talks about is this, in Falling Apart in particular, the loss of common ground between Americans, and so nominally you can be a Colombian, I would imagine, and a Brazilian, from what I understand and have been told. It doesn't really mean anything. I mean, are you wealthy Brazilian? Are you white? Are you black? Are you mulatto? These are
Mm-hmm.
more relevant than anything else.
Yeah.
And I think in the United States,
Yeah, like
increasingly,
I would
that's
say so.
becoming it's approaching a degree of similarity, I think, from based on outside observations. I don't live there anymore, but yeah.
Yeah, well, like, going back to the whole thing of how like people are not as smart as the past generations. I see the stories that like my mom tells me about my grandfather. My grandfather only went to school for one day because he couldn't. If he went to school for more days, then his family would die. They would starve to death. So, my grandfather, he started working at the age of 6, selling newspapers, and so he ended up through sheer force of will, grit, and also intelligence, becoming a multimillionaire. But the one thing about my grandfather is that he was extremely well read. Like he would go and he would consume and devour knowledge on just an incredible scale. And so I find it so like incredible because this my grandfather is a guy who went from absolutely nothing to becoming a multimillionaire, and on top of that, he was extremely read and learned, and he was saving up to go to space back in the 60s because my grandfather was obsessed with space travel, and like my mom says today, if he was alive in the era of Elon Musk, he would probably be one of the first people lining up to go to Mars and to go to the moon, because that was always my grandfather's dream. So in some sense, he was extremely sentient, and I think that's just due to the fact that he had acquired a massive amount of knowledge from just constant reading.
Yeah. I don't think people. I mean, I have to admit, I don't read nearly as much as I used to, and it's a consequence of the internet and the way things are run. Now, I am interested in corruption as well, because many South American countries are quite famous or infamous for high levels of corruption. Certainly in the 80s.
Yeah.
In the 80s, Colombia was absolutely infamous for the. I mean, this is obviously before your time, but you probably have heard of a drug lord called Pablo Escobar, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My mother's first house, it actually got burned down from like a car bomb that was put by like different sicarios. And for anyone who doesn't know the nomenclature of a sicario, that's just Spanish for assassin. So they went and they were putting car bombs all around Medellin, Cali. And there was fights in the streets, and I don't know if you know, but Pablo Escobar, he wanted to buy the government.
Yeah, I know the history. I've always found I'm pretty well informed about Mr. Senor Escobar.
He also bought hippos, and it's pretty funny because Colombia has so much greenery and is so lush that these wild African hippos are now completely docile, and now little kids just ride on them, and they let them through their house.
Yeah, he was
in some parts
a very interesting guy. At some point in time, just before his death in the early 90s, he had about a net worth of about 30 billion, and adjusted for inflation, I think it's close to 60, between 55 and 60 billion by today's reckoning, and that is very impressive. And he's very skilled at eluding narcotics officers and the powers that be. Very interesting biography. If anyone's interested, you should definitely. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I always found him a fascinating personality. He's called the King of Cocaine, by the way.
Yeah. It was.
Unfortunately, Colombia in recent decades has had to cede its crown in narco terrorism. Because
to Mexico,
precisely, Mexico has.
But look. They try and say, oh yeah, Joaquin Guzman, he's got the most money. No, he doesn't. It's still Pablo. Pablo on his worst day did more money and more business than any one of these scrubs in Mexico could ever try. Right.
Well, I don't deny that, but as far as regular effective drug trafficking goes, it really has come down to these Mexican cabals. You don't really hear nearly as much about. I mean, still, I know it's an issue, but you don't really hear as much from Colombia as you did back in the 80s and 90s. But I think just like any cultural shift, the drug culture naturally is going to shift power basis as well.
They get most of their cocaine now. Instead from Colombia, they get it from Peru, because Peru, they made it. They didn't legalize it, but they did make it a non-criminal offense. So now Mexicans are getting the coca plants over from Peru. But like the interesting part is that you can walk through Colombia and coca plants just grow everywhere. They're normal plants. It's just the fact that they have a very unique property.
The other thing, I mean, specifically talking about drug trafficking, that I always found interesting as someone who grew up during the crack epidemic in New York. And
Say no to drugs, kids.
say no to drugs. I remember there's this famous, you can probably find it on YouTube. There's a famous commercial, I believe, from either the late 80s or the early 90s, where the father finds some half-smoked joint or something like that, and he sort of barges into his son's room, and he says, "Where did you learn how to do this, son? Where did you do it?" And then
I learned it from you.
Son, precisely, he says, "I learned it from watching you, Dad." And then there's this sort of serious, ominous voice with, "Parents who have drugs have children who do drugs," and yada, yada, yada. I mean, I think this was the 80s and 90s. People still believe that the drug war was effective.
Exclude Xanax for all of the depressed suburban housewives, right?
Well, yes, but more importantly, I think a critical distinction here is that if you look at the conduct of the so-called drug war, and particularly the way the cartels in Mexico, things like Los Zetas and the Sinaloa cartel, conducted themselves, there was a lot more class to the Pablo era. I mean, yes, there was violence, but I mean, you didn't have to the best of my knowledge, Pablo never went about decapitating people and mutilating them, and so the Mexicans have really turned the narco-terrorism business into something that is not just, it's pretty gruesome, in fact, and exceptionally cruel. Whereas I look at the Pablo era as something more akin to, the kind of guy, a businessman, albeit with some violence, who's kind of doing his thing. It's illegal. Whereas we're talking about medieval levels of cruelty when you listen or you can view some of these things online. Some of the major cartels, I believe at the moment it's the Sinaloa cartel that's sort of number one. It used to be Los Zetas or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty extreme, and so I think that's part of it as well. That the extreme levels of violence that you see in the Mexican drug war and narco terrorism that really distinguish it from I would refer to as sort of classical narco terrorism or narco trafficking going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They just lacks the same class that a Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, like it really does, because I mean, I would say like the big difference, right, is that like if you went back to the Pablo era, I would say that like if they had a problem, they would try and sort it out, and if not, then they would shoot you in your house, right? But that was it. They would just shoot you and you'd be dead.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
It. But what the Mexicans, what they'll do, it's on an ISIS type level.
No, I know.
Like this is just above the pale.
I'll give you below the pale. I will give you an example of something that for example, it used to be, you'd bribe somebody and maybe they take a bribe, maybe not. Yeah, and you shoot them and that'd be it. But we're talking about people being threatened with the body parts of relatives, mutilated, amputated limbs being sent to officials. Yeah, they're on ISIS level, and it is beyond. It is beyond the pale. But that's why they're just more prominent in the news. I mean, I don't really think they're not as savvy. They're just they're more savage, and I'd say that's kind of what's going on. But I mean, you mentioned that Puerto Ricans don't like Mexican. I mean, there definitely is that rivalry I've picked up on. It's hard to really, Mexican culture is we're kind of moving beyond the topic here, the original topic, because you're not Mexican and neither am I. I don't have a lot of exposure with Mexicans these days, certainly.
Well, I mean, like, it's weird, right? Because like if someone looks on the outside, they'll say, "Oh, well, they all speak Spanish, so they're all the same," and they always say that. "Oh, well, you're Puerto Rican, right? That's basically just Mexican." And then I explain, but to no avail, right? And this is because you can go and you can study Spanish and still not understand a Mexican speaking Spanish. Because, for instance, just the easiest one, right? If you say like peanut butter, right? Peanut butter, that's called, like in normal Spanish, that's called maní. But Mexicans, they'll call it crema de cacahuate. So like if you ask a Mexican for peanut butter, they'll tell you crema de cacahuate and not maní. So if you never heard that before, you're like, I don't know what that even is. Is that a sort of cactus or what is that? And it's funny too because you can ask around, and it's noted by many people that in fact Colombians, they have the most grammatically correct Spanish, even even like above the actual Spaniards.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly, from what I said, Spanish is to the extent that I speak it, it's pretty bad. What you tend to get in a lot of the colonized areas of the world, whether it's Spanish or French, or even in the case of North American English, is you do get some archaic features that, whereas the language in the mainland, the place of origins, moved on, that some of these places have retained, and it's not really uncommon. It is interesting, though, that arguably in the Spanish-speaking world, there are more divisions, both culturally, but specifically linguistically, between the Spanish-speaking countries than between the English-speaking countries. I mean, there of course there's differences. There are vocabulary differences occasionally. There are differences of accent, obviously, but there seems to be a lot less hate and a lot more unity across what you could refer to as the Anglophony, Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia, England, etc. Then when you compare that to the Spanish-speaking countries, from the northernmost tip of Mexico down to Argentina and Chile, it's a bit odd, I think.
Well, I mean, like another thing that's weird is that, I mean, even though you guys overall you can seek up better speaking, right? The Germans, the French, and etc. I mean, they're constantly fighting, and they've been fighting for almost all of their known history. Whereas the Spanish-speaking countries, we may not like each other, and we may not, in some cases, even really understand each other. But for some reason, South America is not known for like inter-country warfare. If anything, it's known more for civil wars.
Well, I don't know if that's entirely true. Can you be more specific when you're talking about civil wars?
So like, for instance, I don't know if you know this, but Colombia up until this point has the longest running civil war going on, I think, of any country. It's been going on for 60 years. It's been the communist, the FARC.
FARC, yes, I'm familiar with FARC, and FARC engages in drug trafficking too to enrich itself for its goals. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly that's true, but yeah, I mean, when I think about Chilean Civil War, then that could be accurate. I think, yeah, it might be the case that, of course, the Europe. I mean, there are different languages, different cultures, etc. Maybe the Spanish thing holding it all together in most of South America is some sort of glue of some sort.
Yeah, especially since if you look at the first couple of countries, they all have basically the same type of flag. And I don't know if you know this, but it's because at one point there was Gran Colombia, right? So before, now it's just Colombia, but before it was Gran Colombia. So that was parts of Brazil, Venezuela, Ecuador. That's why they all have the same color scheme. It's because it was all part of Gran Colombia.
Yeah, I wonder if it's. I mean, I don't think it ever happened, but I'm surely there must have been talks about a kind of unified Latin America. Along the lines of a kind of European Union. I think that'd be a disaster, but
yeah, same.
It would at least make some kind of sense in a way that European Union didn't, because when you have completely different languages and somewhat different cultures, it's a bit odd. Whereas generally speaking, a Peruvian can understand an Argentinian, etc., etc. It's
The only one that would be hard is like Brazil, because they speak Portuguese, obviously. But like, but like, if you could figure that out, then yeah, like it's basically okay. It'd be like fine because everyone can up into the most I guess intriguing conversations. I think the average person can in fact understand everyone else, right? I mean, I can hear someone from like Chile or like Argentina, and like I understand them just fine.
And as we draw this to an end, would you like to spend extended amount of time in either Puerto Rico or Colombia, or would you prefer to spend your time in the United States as a rule?
I would like to visit. Well, I mean, I guess
visit. How
not
about
now,
live
but
and work? Would you like to live and work in Colombia?
no.
That
No.
seems like a definitive no. Okay.
Yeah, like unless I had some sort of like YouTube money coming in or something, then then sure maybe, because then I mean even if I'm just earning above average in like the above average in the US, that would be enough that I could live a pretty comfortable lifestyle while living in Colombia.
Yeah, I am curious about something. Would you say that, I mean, it's kind of people talk about sort of low trust, high trust societies. Basically, in Colombia, it's a low trust society. People don't trust other people.
Yeah.
They're always on the lookout of being ripped off. Do people engage in haggling, for example?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, yeah.
My grandfather, he was famous for being a haggler. He could haggle down down to 1 cent.
Right.
And also, just to show you what kind of low trust society it is, the first time that I wanted to go out and urinate on a tree because, well, there was no bathrooms nearby, my cousin had to come. He had to come and he had to watch my back. And I said, why? Why do you have to watch my back? And he says, because if someone sees you and you're just urinating, they'll go up to you and they'll put a knife to your throat and they'll rob you. So, you always need someone watching you. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like when I see people here and they're completely just unaware, I almost feel like I'm a sort of Mongol, where like I'm looking at like the sheep people and I'm like, you guys are so weak. And then you go back and it's just like everyone in Colombia is ready to go. Like they're always watching, they're always vigilant.
I mean, this is the thing, the difference between high trust societies and low trust societies. I mean, yes, people are prepared and on the ready to engage in some kind of conflict, or they're very reactive, but you don't see low trust societies really accomplishing much they're pernicious, they're dangerous. People are yes, they're vigilant and they're prepared. And I remember, in fact, I mean, to a lesser degree, obviously growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s and traveling by myself in the subway, and or going through bad neighborhoods by myself, as in many cases the only white person there, and I didn't feel comfortable. I don't know if that's a great. Sure, it gives you something, it gives you an edge, but it only gives you an edge in a society where people are looking to stab you in the back all the time. I've experienced a lot of low trust societies through traveling, whether it's North Africa or Africa itself or other places where haggling culture is alive, where it's sort of, you can't just shake on a price and agree to it.
Yeah.
You're right. It is alien to people essentially from Western countries or European-based countries, and it's no wonder that so many people from the third world want to leave these places and come to these places. But then there is that risk that eventually high trust societies turn into low trust societies, and then you have the same thing going on there.
Yeah, because I think, I guess if I'm to play the devil's advocate here, I would say, well, the problem is that you Europeans, even though I would consider myself, I guess, more European than anything, but, like, I would think that, like, they're just too trusting. They're too nice, right? They'll let some guy who comes from like a country that they can't pronounce, they'll let them eat their food, bang their wife, and then kick them out of their own home if they want to, because they don't want to be mean and they don't want to be rough. So they let these guys who are savages from other countries come in and run roughshod on them, and then it ends up tearing apart the whole society.
Well, yeah, and I think this is what I was talking to Jean-Francois in the discussion, where kindness can kill you, and I think
definitely.
I think in general, European societies and their derivatives have really gone down this line of excessive kindness to the point of no return. I think France is a curious story. But still, it's a decent example. All these places are really, and even places that historically had no connection to colonialism or the third world, like Scandinavia, Sweden in particular. So. Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely true that people are basically being too nice, and the public at large is being too nice, and that there are enormous risks. And I think in some cases that we're already past a certain stage of no return, point of no return. Mm-hmm. I'd say that to people who continue to endorse unlimited immigration and not checking various things like IQ and what have you, that what if you do happen to have children or you have any investment in the future, that the future will look very different from what you had grown up with. Now, and on top of that, you have the idiocy and the moronic state of the typical American, even the typical white American. So there are a lot of forces coming together that could have potentially down the line have some fairly dire consequences. But I don't really see. There seem to be. This is the problem I see in this current landscape. We're talking high trust, low trust, all this stuff. Basically, you have a lot of people I've noticed who were maybe former libertarians. They're just going full outright white nationalists, and then you have the people on the left, and then you have the status quo centrists. Now, I think we're long due for an open conversation about all of these topics, as I'm not aligned with any of these factions. I remain a neutral party here in the public, and because. Frankly, I don't want to live in a society where I go to the grocer or some electronic shop and I'm spending a half an hour trying to haggle down the price of what I think is excessive. Or, always having I remember what this was like growing up in New York City, always having my eyes on the floor of the subway because I didn't want to rouse the ire of the people there who might not like me for reasons, anyway. Or might have some issue. In fact, I remember a distinct, being quite called out for looking at some. I mean, you never knew. I mean, this was in the 90s. I remember some guy, I don't know what his name was, and the guy just shouted at me from across the subway, "What are you looking at, punk-ass white boy? What the fuck are you looking at, man?" Nothing. Just, I think my eyes had just darted across the subway. It wasn't, he imagined it. But it doesn't matter if he imagines it or not. It matters that he thinks I was, I don't know, doing something. So,
and it's shocking how many people die just because, yo, boy, why you looking at me? Like, I'm just looking places. That's all.
Yeah, I learned, as I kind of became more and more independent as a young teenager riding the subway alone, I learned to take a book, take a newspaper. Although I've never been a huge fan of the mess it makes with the print and just this big clunky thing. But and failing that, I just would just stare at the floor. I had too many strange encounters, not just from that archetype of person, but also crazy people, bums. I remember one guy. This guy was white, was running around threatening to stab people with a hypodermic needle that had allegedly been HIV infected.
Ooh, that's fun. No, like I saw this one black guy, and he was at this bus stop, and he's yelling how the Koreans are poisoning our drinking water and how the white
Yeah.
man is against all blacks, and I'm just standing there trying not to laugh because it's really hard.
Well, he might shoot you if you do, so it's better not to do that. So I remember living in you could call a quasi low trust society because I would commute and I wasn't the neighborhood I lived in. I effectively I was a minority because there are more I guess people of color and different ethnicity than mine. So I remember sort of that scenario of being ultra vigilant and ultra careful and always effectively being paranoid about.
Oh well, yeah, yeah.
I
That's
grew up
the
with
one
that.
thing.
I grew up in New York City. That's in the situation I grew up in. I grew up in. It wasn't the worst neighborhood in the Bronx. It wasn't amazing either. It was okay, but I certainly had to commute through different areas, and I remember being paranoid and always watching out and looking, making sure that I took X route as opposed to Y route because there was a mugging there or whatever. Things have gotten cleaned up quite a bit in New York City, but that is not the society I want to. Preferably, I wouldn't want to live in that society
Well,
anymore.
yeah. Well, yeah. No, like nobody wants that.
Well, no, apparently
Well,
that's the thing.
well, not nobody, right?
Right. Some people actually do want to live in that, and some people, in an almost blinded state, an ignorant state, are pushing things towards that type of society. Now, I
But
think
the thing is that they're not in it yet, so they're thinking, oh yeah, everything's great, but they're like custom made chai lattes, but like when they actually have to deal with it, then they realize.
I do like chai latte. I can't deny it. I've had
Come on, man, everyone loves
many a chai latte
latte.
in my time. I still haven't gotten around. I think it expires the end of December. I still haven't gotten around a pumpkin spice latte. Or was the one I recently saw at the train station when I saw my friend off, my Dutch friend was visiting me a couple of weeks back. I think it was called caramel something something at Starbucks, another Starbucks beverage.
Ooh, that's
it seems an
good.
alternative. Was it caramel? I don't remember. Caramel spice, and in any event. But yeah, sure.
You, you need to get some Puerto Rican coffee or some Colombian coffee.
Well,
That's the
I'm
good
sure
stuff.
that Juan Valdez will be on my side. But the thing is, as well, the the best case scenario I see with this constant stratification and the development is that you basically get these neighborhoods, which is basically my neighborhood and others I've seen in Europe, where people just don't talk to each other. They sort of
Yeah.
the Germans don't really talk to the Turks. They don't. I mean, they'll interact if they have to, but they sort of go. They're basically invisible to each other.
Yeah, like everyone tacitly just hates each other. Like
I wouldn't even call it hate. They just have no interest. The average Turkish
yeah.
person has no interest. I mean, yeah, I was buying something at a pharmacy today, or rather, what are they? The equivalent of I think it's called CS or anyway. And the woman, the checkout counter, the serving lady was obviously a Turkish woman in a hijab. And yeah, she spoke German. But that's the extent of her dealings with German people. They'll stand with you at a pharmacy or whatever. But beyond that, there's not a lot of interaction. And I think you see the same thing in urban centers in the United States, be it New York or Chicago or other places where, yes, the Latinos will talk to white people or black, and so on, and back and forth and vice versa. But it's a forced interaction based on the necessity of doing business, basically. Just like I might go to a Turkish restaurant, and maybe the Turkish restaurants will have Germans being patrons there. Then you tolerate them because they're paying, but you don't really go out of your way. And I think that is the best case scenario. Now I'm going to be making a video about this, but that could last for a while until things go sour in the resource department. When you don't have enough food and water and other things that people need, then it can get prickly. But I mean, I think you can almost perpetually or for a very long time have this sort of stratified society where people engage in forced interaction because of economic necessity, but socially and otherwise they have little to no interaction. I think that will be is the current state of affairs in the United States will likely be the future for quite some time, and is increasingly the case throughout Europe. with very few exceptions. The places in Europe, particularly Western Europe, where you have a lot of ethnic mixture and religious mixture and all what have you. So.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that when I went to New York. Just a bunch of people who they're just going through the daily commute, and they just don't talk to me, don't look at me. They're just going on their way. I found it completely underwhelming. If anything, I like New Jersey more. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot nicer. I think it's.
Well, I'm not a fan of New York. I'm making no secret of that. It is where I grew up, but I have no desire to live there ever again. If I were to live back in the United States, it'd probably be someplace in New England. But
have you ever been to Chicago?
Yes, I have one time. This was pre-Chirac era, by the way. Chicago wasn't always such a murderous and dangerous place as it is now. Well, it's gone through stages, of course, but back when I had visited it, it was not quite that bad. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely got a famous point there with the inner city murders that are ongoing, and there's somebody did, I forgot what it was. I think on the internet in Chicago there was some. I think it was a countdown meter that some absurd number, such as every hour or so, somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, in as much as it's you guys, I think it's mostly Black Americans killing each other there. But
well, I mean, like that's mainly almost all of the gun violence just happens in the South Side, because in the North Side around the Loop and everything, it's completely fine. But like if you go towards like a Humboldt Park or like the South Side, yeah, that's where predominantly that's where the African population is, and that's where almost all the gun violence is happening.
Yeah, a lot of interesting new rap emerging from that scene, from what I heard as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Even though I hate the fact that like Kanye just left us dry. Like, he never talks about Chicago, so now we only have Chance, and like sometimes Drake will talk about the Bulls, but like that's really it. Though, like I will say, I love the architecture of downtown Chicago. I think it's one of the nicest cities,
it's quite nice
architecturally.
Yeah. I mean, the Sears Tower, and I mean, Chicago's not a bad place. It's certainly cheaper than New York as well, and that's
definitely
an advantage. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with Chicago. Like I said, I don't think I'd want to live in a large urban center in the United States anymore if I had a choice. A small city would be fine. In a place like for Burlington, Vermont, for example, even though it's quite liberal. But some place out there that's not completely deprived of necessities, but small enough not to drive you crazy and not too dangerous, and but these places are changing. For example, Portland, Maine has a growing Somalian population, for example, and I mean this can all change, and
well, I mean, like, I mean, shoot. If you look around, for instance, Cicero, it used to mainly be inhabited by, I believe, Germans and Polish, and now it's all just Mexicans.
Yeah, well, I think historically, certain areas or sections.
Now, like, obviously, that changes throughout time and whatnot, but
yeah. I mean, there used to be a designated Hungarian area in New York. There still is, but it had a huge, I mean, comparatively speaking, a very large Hungarian population. Now it's more a historical phenomenon than anything else. So these things do change, and as the Mexican population grows in the United States, there will be more and more areas and neighborhoods that are primarily Mexican. My take on all of this is that, at the very least, we need to have some kind of open discussion that goes beyond the internet, that talks about the facts and the details, and doesn't really shy away from the subjects and topics that make people feel uncomfortable. But for that to happen, it would require a degree of intellectual honesty that I think that most human beings are simply not capable of. And so, yeah, I don't really see that happening anytime soon, or possibly ever.
Yeah, unfortunately, I really would just love to have an honest talk, but most people are completely unwilling to.
Yeah. So, I'll just observe from afar and maintain my neutrality in these matters, and to see what happens. I think there's somewhat interesting times we're living. You could say that of any time, but
Yeah, but this is especially so, I think.
well, yeah. And in particular when you have a counterpoint from a previous year, and I think anyone who's of my generation or older, slightly older, got to experience the cusp of the sort of the tail end of almost a previous epoch in humanity's development, and now we're in a different stage, and that's pretty interesting. Whereas your generation, you never experienced that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw the new millennium, then we had the old 9/11, and then after that, the whole American culture changed, and Columbine sure didn't help, and now everyone just seems to hate each other, and everyone's paranoid about the next big thing that's going to happen.
So with that said, I'll have a final question for you as someone who has at least American citizenship. You have the passport.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to you to be an American?
It doesn't mean anything, because
What
to
about
me,
Chicago deep dish pizza?
oh, don't even get me started, man. I love Chicago deep dish pizza. That's like one of the only reasons that I would not want to leave Chicago, because I mean, it's cold, right? Here it is freezing cold. Like we got the beautiful.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, on top of Chirac, we have Chi-Town, Siberia, right? Because one year it was negative, I think like 20 or 40. But hey, we have our strong Midwest genes, and we have that powerful deep dish pizza that feeds a family of 6 for 5 days.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's the thing. You ask your typical American these days what it means. It's just you were born there, and that's about it. There's no common sense of identity, no common sense of culture, not even a. People talk about things like civic nationalism or sort of common civic culture, but that doesn't exist either anymore. I'd say that's why I can't really. People always ask me, why am I always slagging off the United States? I'm not really slagging off the United States so much as I can't find. I don't really recognize anything I see there as familiar, or comfortable, or even attractive to me. So yeah, I don't. It's just it's a place that that I was born in, and I have a passport. But beyond that, it doesn't really have a lot of meaning to me.
Well, yeah, like I used to be like super adverse to the United States, and I used to say like, oh well, America does bad stuff too and everything. But eventually, I tried to really get myself into being a patriotic American. But the problem is that it's pretty lonely being on that boat all by you lonesome, because no one else even knows the starting basis of America. They don't know the history. They don't know the culture.
It's about the food.
They couldn't care
deep
less.
dish pizza.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, like the deep dish pizza, the Tex-Mex food down south, right?
The strip malls, the Starbucks beverages, the chai lattes.
Your
that's basically all American
Thai
culture
Korean
is.
fusion.
I have a friend who lives on the East Coast, and he'll go out in his car, and there are all these drive-throughs where he can pick up food, and they have a million different names. It's not just McDonald's or Burger King, and that's basically American culture. That is the legacy, and that's of course that's spread across the world to some degree, but that's the legacy of the United States, at the ground level at least.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like since I've been writing this book, I wanted to put like different sorts of aspects, right? So I've been searching through the whole American culture, and it's so interesting because you'll have groups southwest, and you'll have groups in the Appalachian the Appalachian Mountains, and you'll have the French Creoles, and it's just, yeah, sure, like technically it's a country, but like there's a bunch of many cultures and many countries, and each one is so fascinating, but no one cares about the Creoles or the Cajuns. No one cares about the history of the Appalachian Mountains. No one cares about the small like Dutch population that's in New York. They don't care.
Well, no. As I mentioned to Jean-Francois in that talk, the United States is a kind of a country of many countries within it. I have no commonality with the sort of church-going, gun-toting Texan cowboy culture either. But yeah, it's like I said, interesting times we're living in. I think it's interesting to get a perspective on Colombia and to a lesser extent Puerto Rico, particularly Colombia, because it's just so different, and it really provides a good example of the kind of society that most people wouldn't want to live in. Many people don't have a choice, obviously, but yeah. So
yeah, like I would say so. I mean, like it's fun to go to, it's fun to explore, but like overall, I would say that if you gave the average Colombian a chance to come to the U.S., they would take it in a heartbeat. Whereas I don't believe most Americans would drop everything and go to Colombia.
Not even for the large buttocks, booties.
No, not even.
Right.
Not even for the biggest
I understand
ones.
that a lot of these booties are in fact booty implants, from what I understand. So,
Hey, well, guess what? If we want to talk about cultures in South America, that's a whole South American thing, right? Like, you see that, for instance, in the great country of Brazil, right? They're famous for their big buttocks, but how many of them are fake, right? How many are fake and how many are real?
I can't help but think that there might be a genetic component here, that this obsession with large buttocks tends to be, in my observation, something that is much more common amongst, I wouldn't say exclusively, but much more common amongst people or men of color. I have no obsession with buttocks. I've never encountered, to my knowledge, I mean, yeah, there's the whole ass or tits thing, but
I would say. Oh, sorry.
But I was going to say that
like,
in the case of the fact that there's a buttocks implant culture in South America tells you a lot about the inclinations people have there, men specifically.
But I hate that. I hate that because, like, to me, the whole reason why it's impressive is because that's basically you're a freak of like genetics, that you have these outrageous proportions. But like, if it's all implanted, then like to me, that's not special at all.
Well, I think you're missing the point. It's irrelevant. The point is it's more attractive to a certain set of men, or even a large subset of men there, and that's what they. I mean, women style themselves and dress themselves and shape themselves in terms of plastic surgery in a way that is most appealing to men, so they can get access to a partner with resources. And if that means having a big ass that is only brought about through implants, then that, so be it.
Yeah.
If tomorrow there were some large culture that I don't know, liked big flabby arms, then I'm sure women would go for that too. I mean, who knows? It's a bit strange, but yeah. So I don't really see this as it's just pretty normal. It's just I find the divergent taste, this obsession with large asses, is something that I don't understand. It's really beyond me.
Yeah, but like opposite to that, for instance, you see a lot with the Japanese overall, like culturally, and like in their anime, that they love women that have huge, big breasts.
Well, I think that's more a case of something that is largely absent in the population. I mean, this actually, there's some physiological studies. I mean, East Asian women in general, Japanese, they tend to have the smallest. So it's kind of a hyperbolic reflection of what is not present when you look at something like anime porn or hentai or what have you. I don't really think. I mean, it's very understandable. Whereas, yeah, the butt thing is kind of strange into itself.
I mean, like, it really is a whole, like, cultural zeitgeist where, like, it's almost ass worship.
Yeah, well, I'm not a fan of women worship in general, but the ass worship is, I don't understand it. This obsession, but you know, people, I mean, we're a bunch of apes at the end of the day, and certain apes have certain tastes, and you know, I don't care if somebody, if they want to go chase women with large asses, then be my guest, whatever. That's not my business.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I just find that whole thing. I mean, it might, if I could actually do some proper research, maybe I could come up with some answers for that. I don't think it's in terms of actual scientific research, a well-researched field. Why you seem to have certain genetic populations favoring certain attributes over the other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a general trend with buttocks and breasts as sort of signs of fertility, but why the ass obsession is so pronounced in African cultures as well as Latin American culture is something that is reasonably interesting from a kind of evolutionary perspective. But I don't really know off the top of my head, so I'd have to do more research on it. Well, anyway, my guest has been Juan, not Juan Valdez, but a different Juan, and he is young and has, in all likelihood, a decently long life ahead of him, and will be experiencing many interesting things in the years to come. I would imagine.
Just to say, I'm starting a new YouTube channel. It's called One on One. So that's for any sort of personal discussions and overall quandaries. And Ape, you're invited anytime.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that invitation, and yeah, I mean, do let us know when that's up. So, hope that we were a bit all over the map, but I hope that was nonetheless informative, and if not that, then at the very least entertaining. So I will thank the audience for participating and listening, and I will likely check you out at a later date, provided I'm still alive, as will possibly my guest. So you take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.
You too.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.